Good afternoon. I'd like to call the March 16th, 2023 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting to order. I'd like to start by requesting that the Kansas Open Meetings Act required notice has been properly provided.
I can confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice was provided.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to roll call.
Okay. Vice Chair Hardy.
Here.
Board Member May.
Here.
Board Member Trow. I knew
Here.
that. Board Member Waters.
Here.
Chair Dorsweiler.
Here.
Board Member Owens. We have a quorum of 5 of 6 members.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to the approval of minutes from the last meeting. Is there any additions or corrections to the January 19th, 2023 meeting minutes? If not, is there a motion for approval?
I move we approve the minutes.
Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Minutes approved. Moving on to new business. The first item for new business is Application V18-17.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. So for the first item of today's agenda, we have a request for a front yard setback variance of 23 feet from 25 feet, which is the minimum front yard setback required on a corner lot in an R1 zone, to 2 feet to allow the construction of a 12 by 16 storage building, and a front yard setback variance of 19 feet from 25 feet, which is the standard, to 6 feet to allow construction of a 7 by 7 above ground storm shelter in the non-address side front yard of a corner lot at 1209 Whetstone Drive. So some background information on the property. It's located in the Stone Lake Addition, which was platted in 2010, and this part of the subdivision was zoned R1 in 2010 as well. So this house was constructed in 2022, and it's located on a short cul-de-sac on the corner of Whetstone Drive, which is the address side, and Whetstone Port, which is the cul-de-sac. So as you can see from the site plan the site plan, the tornado shelter and detached storage shed are being proposed to be located east of the dwelling in the non-address side front yard setback. Because the irregular shape of this corner lot, coupled with a 10-foot utility easement along the north side yard property line, result in an unusually small backyard area. And constructing the two proposed structures in the backyard area, which would be northwest of the dwelling, would result in very limited options for outdoor living space or open play area space. So when the applicant communicated with city staff regarding this project in February 2023, they were informed that they had the following options. Number one, they could revise their site plan and relocate the proposed structures to a location outside the non-address front yard setback, or they could apply for a front yard setback variance from the BZA, specifically a variance to section 4258-2C of the city code, which states that accessory structures on corner lots must be set back from the side street a distance not less than that required for the principal structure. So the applicants chose to apply for the variance to locate the proposed shed 2 feet from the front property line and tornado shelter 6 feet from the front property line. And as justification, the applicants state that the proposed structures are necessary for storage and health safety because the property at 1209 Whetstone Drive does not have a basement, which could help with storage and safety. Also, the irregular shape of this corner lot and the presence of that 10-foot north side yard utility easement results in an unusually small backyard area, and constructing structures there would very much limit options for outdoor open space. So the zoning uses surrounding this property are R1 single family in all directions. And next, I'll get into our staff analysis. So in terms of uniqueness, the applicants state that their lot is an irregularly shaped corner lot with 2 front yards. And because of that, they don't have a rear yard. They state that the majority of lots in Block 2 of the Stone Lake Addition that are not located on a corner or cul-de-sac lot are approximately 87 by 130 feet with a 10-foot rear yard utility easement, which results in approximately 8,220 square feet of developable area outside a front yard setback or utility easement, and that would be on an approximately 11,310 square foot lot. Conversely, the Whitney's lot has approximately 7,130 square feet of developable area outside a front setback or utility easement, and their lot is approximately 13,900 square feet, which makes their lot unique compared to adjacent lots. Like I said, they also don't have a basement, which could provide a storage area and a tornado shelter. Lastly, there is a door on the east side of the house, directly west of the proposed tornado shelter, and the applicants state that they want to have quick and easy access to the proposed tornado shelter in the event of an emergency, and exiting the door on the east side of the home to access a tornado shelter in the backyard area northwest of the house is not exactly an efficient, quick route. Staff agrees that having a corner lot with 2 front yards is not the norm for most residential properties, but being located on a corner lot is not a unique circumstance. Additionally, this lot is rather large at 13,900 square feet, with possible alternative locations for the proposed accessory structures. There is space northwest of the house. Staff would agree that constructing structures there would result in very limited options for outdoor space for children and pets, so they do have a valid point. In terms of no adverse effects, the applicants state that a 6-foot privacy fence would be constructed along Whetstone Port if this variance is approved, and that would minimize the visual impacts of the proposed structures. They also state that the proposed structures would abide by the city's accessory structures compatibility checklist, and that both have been reviewed and approved by the Stone Lake Addition Architectural Review Committee. And they further state that the proposed structures are small and that the effects of them would be localized on their property. So staff agrees with the applicants that this variance would not create many adverse effects on neighboring properties. However, allowing the construction of accessory structures in a front yard setback could detract from the appearance of the surrounding neighborhood. Although it may not obstruct vehicular visibility, it still creates a visual encroachment in an area that is normally left to be an open front yard space. Staff recognizes that there would be a 6-foot tall fence there that would and the structures would match the house aesthetically, but the question still remains whether there's another location that would meet the needs of the applicants while still being located behind that front yard setback. The applicants state the proposed tornado shelters protect life safety, and the proposed storage shed is needed because the property doesn't have a basement. Staff recognizes the applicants want a tornado shelter and storage shed for safety and functionality rather than aesthetics. However, there does appear to be sufficient space northwest of the house for a 12 by 16 storage shed and 7 by 7 tornado shelter with at least 3 feet separation from the house, at least 5 feet between the structures, and at least a 3-foot side yard setback. So the issue that the board must consider here is whether a strict application of the zoning ordinance constitutes an unnecessary hardship on the applicants by causing an obstruction of their backyard view, resulting in very limited usable backyard area. The applicants feel the proposed storage shed could improve the appearance of the property because not being allowed to have a storage shed could potentially result in clutter, which could then create an eyesore. Staff agrees that the proposed structures would be aesthetically compatible with the applicant's home, and that if they constructed them there, this wouldn't affect vehicular visibility or obstruct a clear sight triangle. However, the welfare of the public does also include aesthetic concerns such as an open front yard area unobstructed by structures. Also, approving a variance in this case could potentially set a precedent for the construction of other structures in other front yard setbacks, so that's another thing the board has to consider here. And lastly, conformity with the zoning ordinance. The applicants state the proposed accessory structures would not significantly change the appearance of the lot or surrounding neighborhood because both of the proposed structures are small at 49 square feet and 192 square feet and would be shielded by a privacy fence. So staff's response to that is that granting a variance in this case could undermine the spirit and intent of the front yard building restriction. So in this case, it's important the applicant demonstrates to the board that the locations of the proposed accessory structures are the only possible locations available. So while staff agrees that revising the site plan and relocating the proposed structures to a location outside the front yard setback would result in a very small backyard area, staff would request that the applicant provide additional justification as to why the proposed accessory structures could not be constructed northwest of the house. So staff has identified the following alternatives for the board. Number one, the board could approve the requested front yard setback variances with or without any conditions. The board could approve lesser variances than requested, so less than the 23 feet and 19 feet being requested, if the required findings of fact can be made. The board could approve a front yard setback variance for the above-ground tornado shelter, but require the storage shed to be relocated out of the front yard setback area. The board could postpone consideration of this application for more information, or the board could deny the applicant's setback variance request. Staff is of the opinion that the applicants need to offer more explanation as to why the area northwest of the house is not a suitable location for the proposed accessory structures. Staff would also request that the applicants further explain how not allowing the proposed structures in the non-address front yard setback as required by our city code results in an unnecessary hardship that denies them reasonable or beneficial use of their property. More information is needed as to why the standards imposed by the Salina City Code that requires both of the proposed accessory structures to be located behind the front yard setback is unfair to the applicants and that a special exemption should be granted in this circumstance. So that concludes staff's presentation, and we're here for any questions, and the applicant is also in attendance.
Are there any questions for staff?
I have one quick one.
Mhm.
Is this area in the floodplain out there, is that considered a floodplain?
It is not.
It is not. Okay, thank you.
You alluded to precedent, and I was curious, are there other examples of the front yard setbacks that have been permitted prior to this one?
I have not seen any. Maybe Dustin or...
Yeah, I don't recall a front yard setback similar to this for being approved for a shed structure. I do know that you will find that there are sheds in different locations around town that are properties in which sheds are located in a secondary front yard area. And that's probably more of an enforcement issue. It's something that the Planning Commission looked at a number of years ago in amending the code to potentially permit some sheds in a secondary front yard, but it wasn't something that the Planning Commission was interested at that time, and so it never got an ordinance to allow sheds or accessory structures in a secondary front yard has never been approved. So to answer your question, I don't believe there's been any variances for sheds in the secondary front yard that I can think of.
So would this kind of situation be more properly addressed by ordinance?
Well, there was a thought at one point in time that that was the case. However, the decision makers at the time didn't agree with that sentiment. So what had happened is a number of years ago, the Planning Commission explored the idea of accessory structures in a side yard or a secondary front yard. And at that time, they decided that they did not want to amend or create a zoning ordinance change that would allow accessory structures in the secondary front yard area.
Spencer, I have a question for
Yeah.
you. On the staff recommendation, you have a statement, the applicants need to offer more explanation as to why. Can you share what other information you think that might be?
Specifically, information that further explains how not allowing these structures constitutes an unnecessary hardship.
In other words, explanation for why the sheds or the accessory structures couldn't be put in the area that's considered the rear yard or the portion of the property that's northwest of the building, outside of the easements or setback areas. I know the applicant made the statement that it reduces the play area, but it doesn't. It just moves the location of the play area because the same amount of area of the property is being taken up by the sheds. It's just in a different location. In other words, so this area would be more open, and in the front yard area would be more open because you'd have grass and open space there, or the opportunity for grass and open space there because the accessory structures aren't there. However, you would have more structures in the area northwest of the house, but the lot coverage of the property would be exactly the same either way.
Okay, thank you.
One more question. So that I'm more clear here, a necessary hardship then would exist if there were no other locations on that lot that could accommodate these two structures. Is that what
That could be a
Yes.
correct deduction, yes.
Basically, we have this secondary front yard setback requirement in the code. Why should we grant a special exemption in this particular situation?
Are there any other questions for staff? Would the applicant like to speak? Sure. If you'd come up to the mic and state your name, please.
Hi, my name is Sean Whitney, and my wife and I own this property. I'll start by saying the locations of those were initially chosen more out of what we thought was best for the property, unknowing about this setback. It's our negligence. We didn't understand that setback over there. So, but the tornado shelter is there. So it's not really shown there, but where it says 8.1 there in the little corner, that's the exit of the garage. So it's very close to the tornado shelter. That's why it's there. The shed is there. I'm a hobbyist. I have hobby interests that I do in my garage, and I also store some stuff in the shed that's related to that. Plus, of course, all my garden tools, and being we have no basement too, we use that storage for that too. But it was just access to the home, and the garage was really the primary reason why we put it there. Not knowing about the setback, but that acute angle of the property does create a somewhat smaller than we expected space to be able to put these kind of things. Again, unbeknownst to us, and that's our own ignorance, but this was initially the plan based on what made the most sense for us, so that's how we ended up here.
Okay. Are there any questions for the applicant?
Thank you. I drove out there to take a look, and the house looks pretty new,
Brand new, yeah.
and it's on slab. Is there any requirement for a safe room to be included in a house with no basement?
It's not required. To my knowledge, this was our choice, was to put in a storm shelter.
Instead of a safe room?
Right. Well, in other words, if we'd have been involved in the home construction from the beginning, there was an option, but we did not. We were not involved. We came along when the house
It was an existing home?
Right. 80% complete when we came on the scene. So.
Okay.
Are there any additional questions for the applicant?
Just one, I thought of, sir. Is there a way that you could attach these to the house?
I guess I'm not clear what you're getting.
Well, instead of putting them out along the fence rail, like there's a door there, couldn't just, instead of having them out there near the fence line,
Right.
bring them up next to the house?
I suppose. I hadn't really gotten to Plan B yet, to be fair, but I didn't want to crowd the house with these things just for the sake of taking care of the home and stuff like
Okay.
that, but.
Okay. Well, I know, like Commissioner Hardy, I went out there and saw it, and so that's when I first saw your door.
Mm-hmm.
There on that side, that's what I thought, they could run right in there and,
Right. Right.
so, okay.
Any additional questions?
Mr. Whitney, are you open to looking at other options with these two?
If I need to, I will, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And I looking at the plan, you can tell me if I'm correct or not. It looks like that one corner on the, I forget what the compass heading would be. It says 25 feet, so it sits, really the corner of the house sits on the setback.
Right on the line, within a foot, yeah.
Okay.
So back to his question, even if you pulled that up to the house, let's say, you still would have some percentage of the shed, for speaking of the shed directly, it would still be in the
Right.
setback, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak?
We do not have anyone on Zoom, so it would be somebody in this room if they wish to speak.
Are there any motions to come before the board?
I would, a little bit hesitant to grant something that can be easily construed as a precedent down the road, and seeing as it seems to be there are options that have not maybe been explored fully yet, I would move that we deny application V23-1.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded that the application V23-1 be denied. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to application V23-2, filed by Kansas Wesleyan University.
Give me a moment to get my graphics up here, and then I'll jump right into it. All right. So the second item is a variance item requested by Kansas Wesleyan University, and they are currently working on a project to replace the former married housing dormitory that was located at the southwest corner of Santa Fe and Kirwin. It's this L-shaped building that you see in this aerial photo. The building was originally, I don't have it up on the screen, do I? There we go, now you can see it. This L-shaped building at the corner of Kirwin and Santa Fe. It's the former married housing dormitory. It was originally constructed in 1957 and was demolished in December of 2020 and is currently a vacant site on their campus. So the property is part of the KW grounds, which was originally platted in 1886. A lot of the development in the area happened and occurred in the early 1900s. The zoning lot, which is the entire block between Highland and Santa Fe, east and west, and then also Claflin and Kirwin, north to south. And so the entire zoning lot is encompassed or bounded by public streets. There are two existing buildings, two dormitories. Both of them were constructed in 1966, and I'll see if I can get a picture of that for you. Here's a survey, and you can see that there's an existing building that runs north-south and an existing building that runs east-west. So the north-south building is Wilson Hall, and the east-west building is Wesley Hall. They were both constructed in 1966, and they have pre-existing non-conforming features that we'll get into in a moment. What Kansas Westland is planning to do is erect a student dining hall where the former married student housing building was. That's been demolished in that corner of the property. And that particular dining hall would have a 3-foot setback along Kirwin, a 20-foot setback along Santa Fe, and would increase the total lot coverage of the zoning lot that has the 2 existing dormitories to 34%. So the required setback in the University District, which this particular property is zoned, is 50 feet. And so we're going from 50 feet down to 3 feet along Kirwin and 50 feet down to 20 on Santa Fe. And the maximum lot coverage is 30. So what Kansas Westland is requesting is going from 30% to 34%. The existing building along Highland Avenue, Wilson Hall, has a setback of 20.56 feet, and Wesley Hall along Claflin has a setback of 17.42. So they would be what we call pre-existing non-conforming. They were legally constructed when they were built in 1966. However, they do not conform to the 50-foot setback requirement that we have today. So in terms of the criteria that we look at, the first item is uniqueness. And many of the properties, as I said, were developed in the early 1900s, with these 2 buildings being in the 1960s. And so you do have a development pattern that is a little more urban and doesn't meet all of the existing requirements that you would have. And that's a little bit unique because when you look at most university districts, you're not surrounded by an urban development pattern that's fully developed. If you look at Kansas State University out west of town, they have a number of buildings, and the setting is quite different, where there isn't a lot of existing development around them, and it certainly isn't of an urban density. And so they don't have or have not had any challenges or problems with meeting the setback or lot coverage requirements. So staff would note that the urban development pattern that is existing, combined with the lot being completely bounded by public streets, is a unique circumstance for Kansas Westland in this case. Looking at the adverse effects on the neighbors, Kansas Westland has close relationships with or ownership of virtually all of the surrounding properties. The only properties that they don't own or have close relationships with are some of the properties on the north side of Kirwin. They own everything to the west, and south is their main campus, and then to the east is the Methodist church that they're closely related to and tied to. So the adverse effects on the neighboring properties could be viewed as being minimal, especially since they have those close relationships. And the location of the proposed dining hall is in virtually the same location of the former dormitory. So it would be viewed as a replacement of one kind to another in the same location. In looking at the unnecessary hardship, Kansas Westland has been growing, and they've had a lot of development projects come before our different boards and with different permits and building projects that have been taking place in recent time. And they have a growing need for student dining on their campus for the convenience of their students and for their campus life. The proposed front yard setbacks would help preserve the parking. So if you were to look at the site plan, you would notice that there's parking, and a lot of this is existing parking. If you were to move the building south 50 feet and move it to the west another 30 feet, what you would find is that you would push everything over to where you would eat up a substantial number of off-street parking stalls, which Kansas Westland staff agrees could unnecessarily impact and negatively impact the surrounding properties by causing more on-street parking and traffic congestion around the Kansas Westland campus. Staff would also point out that strict application of the maximum lot coverage requirement for the property would cause undue hardship on Kansas Westland because the zoning lot is bounded by public streets on all four sides, which means that there's no opportunities for Kansas Westland to acquire additional property in order to reduce their lot coverage. So they're really limited on their potential options to meet the strict application of the code. In looking at the effect on public health, safety, and welfare, historically, the northeast corner of the property has had a dormitory on it. It was occupied by the L-shaped building that we looked at on the 2020 aerial photo before it was demolished. And the proposed development will not increase the risk of fire spread, negative impact of site runoff or drainage patterns, or obstruct visibility of the traveling public when compared to the dormitory building. Staff did pull reports and records of accidents at the corner of Santa Fe and Kirwin, noting that the previous L-shaped building had a similar setback. We were curious if there were any visibility issues that had caused problems with accidents, and there's never been an accident on record at this location. So we do feel comforted in knowing that the previous setback, which is similar to what's being proposed, did not cause any traffic issues. Looking at conformity with general spirit and intent of the ordinance, variance should not be granted that would undermine or defeat the purpose in which the regulation was adopted. And when we look at front yard setback requirements, one of the principal reasons for having them is to preserve front yard area, to make sure that we have good open space along our street frontages, so that as vehicles drive along the street frontages that they can see animals or children that might be approaching the roadway in advance. So having that good visibility is important, as well as aesthetically having a universal setback where you have green space and open space along the street frontages between the property line and the proposed building. One of the consequences of reducing the front yard setback is you're limiting and reducing the amount of space that you have for front yard landscaping, which the zoning ordinance requires all new structures to have front yard landscaping if they're of commercial or a nature in this case, which would be university. And so as part of the project, the applicant will be required to provide front yard landscaping, and by having reduced setbacks, you could reduce the amount of area in which you have opportunities to provide that landscaping. With that said, there are roughly a 20-foot setback along Highland, Claflin, and then Santa Fe as well. So there is sufficient area to add landscaping or put plantings in that would meet the landscaping requirements. The only area that is really reduced to a point where you can't have a lot of landscaping or there's not a lot of opportunity is the north side along Kirwin Avenue. The applicant does have some renderings that we'll look at, because one of the questions that comes up when you have a building that's that close to the street, there are some aesthetic impacts. And so exploring what those would look like or what that might mean can be important. So this is the floor plan that shows the layout of the building and its configuration in relationship to the sidewalks and front yard area. This would be an elevation for the north elevation. So this is, if you were on the well, if you're looking at it from Kirwin, that's what it would appear to be, and there are some renderings that we can look at here in a moment. This would be the east side of the building. So this would be the side looking at Santa Fe if you're driving north and south or coming to the central part of campus from the north. That's what it would appear to look like. This is the south side of the building, so this would be the building facing Wesley Hall. That's the building, the dormitory to the south. And this is the west side of the building, and that is what it would look like from the parking lot. So this is the view that you would see if you're parking here and walking into the building that way. So here are the renderings. This is that same view from the west. You can see that there's a mixture of materials that are being proposed. There is some brick surfacing on the exterior. The primary or majority material that is being proposed is a metal material, and that metal material is a metal siding, a vertical siding, and then a vertical, or rather a metal roof structure as well. There is, in addition to the vertical metal siding and brick, there's also some horizontal hardy board type composite material that's being used or being proposed, and both the horizontal material and the vertical metal siding have a gray color to them. This is a elevation drawing rendering from Santa Fe. This is also from Santa Fe. It's more of a close-up view. And then lastly, we have the elevation from Kirwin, and this is our closest setback. This is 3 feet. So this would be the setback that would probably be most concerning of the two. 20 feet along Santa Fe, even though it doesn't meet the 50-foot requirement, it would line up with the existing Wesley Hall a little more. And 3 feet is really, really tight or close along Kirwin. And this is the elevation that we have. I don't know if this is vertical metal siding as well. That's something that the applicant could clarify for us. And with that, we do have some options for you, as well as some findings on page 7. So the board could approve the requested setback and lot coverage variances with or without any conditions. You could postpone consideration if additional information is needed, or you could deny the applicant's various requests if the appropriate findings of fact can't be made. Because of the substandard setbacks of the existing buildings on this zoning lot and the existing development pattern and the precedent that the proposed, or that the married student housing development had on the property, and the fact that it was there for over 60 years without negatively affecting the neighborhood, staff would recommend option number 1, which would be to approve the proposed variance request with some conditions. 1 is that a gutter and downspout system be installed to direct all stormwater runoff to Santa Fe Avenue, where there is a storm water inlet connecting to an 8-inch underground storm sewer. The second is that KWU shall submit a landscape planting plan showing the location, types, and varieties of all proposed plantings, and the proposed landscape planting plan must make a good faith effort to meet the landscaping requirements of the landscape regulations. And then lastly, the third condition would be that construction of the Beaver Dining Hall would substantially conform with the site plan and building elevation drawings presented to and approved by the board. So what we'd mean by that is, once the building were constructed, a building permit is issued, and all the inspections have been passed, if you were to go out there, what you would see in the renderings is what you would see on site or in the field. With that, staff would take any questions that the board may have.
Are there any questions for staff?
On that Kirwin slide that you just had up there,
Yes.
the setback looks different than I thought it was in my head. There's a grassy area that exists between the street and the building. How wide is that area, do you know?
We can measure. Here's the aerial photo, so we can get a pretty good idea. It'll get us within a few inches to So it's probably 13 feet, which is standard.
Okay, so it's
So the
not,
back of curb to the sidewalk's about 13 feet.
I had, in my head, I had a picture of the DAV,
Yeah.
or Ashton's, and that, I've always, makes me mad every time I drive by it. So I've been mad a lot of times.
Sure.
And that doesn't appear to be that way, and so it's just closer to the sidewalk then.
Yeah, it's going to be 3 feet from the sidewalk, basically, if you want to think about it in those terms, because there is a green space, and I actually measured the wrong green space, so.
Right.
I mean,
And
it's-
that, on that side, that setback that they're proposing is similar to the setback that was there for the old dorm?
As far as we can tell, it's pretty similar. It may be a little bit tighter, meaning a little bit closer to Kirwin than this was, but I mean, you can see on the aerial photo, it looks, it's probably about 2 feet or so. I don't know. It was really close. So it's pretty similar to what was there before.
Okay.
I think the question, or one of the questions, not the question, but one of the questions is how comfortable you feel with the bulk of the building and the design of the elevation that faces Beaverly, or that faces Kirwin. And, because that always has a big impact. With it being that close, a design that's just a blank wall can feel uncomfortable, where if it's attractive and aesthetically pleasing, it kind of goes unnoticed, or adds to the environment versus taking away from the environment.
Are there any additional questions for staff? If not, would the applicant like to speak?
Not unless anybody has any questions.
Are there any questions for the applicant?
Is Johnny, if you wouldn't mind, yeah, please approach the podium so that, because I'm going to ask you a question. That elevation on Kirwin that we looked at, is that vertical metal siding, or so I was correct in that? Okay. And it's a gray color. I mean, that's the way it appears.
That's correct.
Okay.
There's actually two different colors. One's going to be a little darker gray, then the other's a little bit lighter.
Okay, so the horizontal is a little darker, and the vertical metal is
Horizontal is going to be the hardy board.
the hardy board, and that's the
Right.
darker color?
Correct.
Okay. All right. That's all I had. Thank you. I just wanted that clarification.
Wainscoting on the very front part closest to Santa Fe.
Correct, and we're going to have an alternate to do 4-foot wainscot all the way around the building.
Do you have a question for that?
Well, and so that Kirwin side then is pretty much just a blank wall.
There's some windows, mainly it's blank because that's the west part of it is mainly the commercial kitchen.
That would, I was just thinking in terms of keeping it from looking like a DAV. And it already looks better. But if there was landscaping that would break up the wall effect, that would change the dynamic some.
Sure, we could add additional landscaping, except it would not be on Kansas Wesleyan property, probably. And we could have some, bushes along the building, but we only have like 3 feet. But if we went outside the sidewalk area in that grassy area and put more landscaping, we could do that, but that wouldn't be Kansas Wesleyan property,
Right.
which we can do it if we're allowed to do it.
Johnny, you mentioned doing the brick wainscoting. Is that a 4-foot, or what is that?
Correct. The
Okay.
alternate is going to be 4 foot, just like it is on the front, then it's going to wrap around the entire building.
Okay. So that would basically take this view here and superimpose it on the north side as well.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And how far along that block does that building extend?
Oh,
Over half of it?
yes. It's pretty much the whole grassy area. Yeah, right there. What is that?
Okay.
So it's about 120 feet or so, looks like, from the northeast corner of the building to the northwest corner of the building.
Okay.
So this is the site plan for the whole block, just to give you some kind of context of the size of the building in relationship to the dormitories and the entire site.
Mm-hmm. And the site triangle's okay?
Yeah, it's like I said, we ran accident reports, and there's never been an accident. It doesn't seem to be any issues with visibility in that area.
Okay.
So it looks to me that it's going to come out to about here. So if you look at the site plan, it comes out to about that east edge of that north notch of Wesley Hall. So it will extend east-west, not quite as far as the former building, but it would have a similar impact on the area as the former building. So it would go to about yay.
Is there a limitation on commercial or university property concerning like boulevard trees or shrubs or anything like that? At residential areas, there doesn't seem to be a big enforcement issue on things like that.
So university campuses are required to meet the landscape regulations for all new development that happens. Most of them, particularly with Kansas Westland, have buildings that predate the landscape regulations, which were adopted in 1994. And so not all of the buildings are subject to those regulations, but new buildings certainly would be, and this would be a new building. And so it would be subject to the landscape regulations. In terms of boulevard style landscaping, I think what you mean is like trees along the street on the right of way. We do allow that as a voluntary situation. It's something that is outside of the front yard setback area, which is where the required landscaping is supposed to be according to the landscape regulations, but it's something that Kansas Westland has done on different areas of their campus.
There's one of the reasons that landscaping in the right-of-way is not encouraged per se in our landscaping regulations is the likelihood of disappearance. So if you'll recall South 9th Street, what it looked like before and then after, and all of those trees were in the right-of-way between the sidewalk and the street, and they all got removed. And so one of the risk factors when you put landscaping in the right-of-way is there could be some project that comes along that results in that having to be removed. And so the likelihood of landscaping staying and remaining unscathed by public projects is to have it on private property. So it's only put in the right-of-way as a last resort. The other thing is that trees that are placed in the right-of-way eventually become the maintenance responsibility of the city. So there is actually a permit process for that involving the city forester, because if we're going to be involved in maintaining them or trimming them or even removing them, then we want to have some say on where they go in the right-of-way and what the variety is.
Are there any additional questions for the applicant? If not, is there anybody from the public that wishes to speak?
We do not have anyone on Zoom currently, so anyone interested in this topic would be in the room.
Is there a motion to come before the board?
I move we approve application V23-2, the board alternative number 1, with the 3 staff recommendations on page 8 of the report.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to administrative items, 3.3, in regards to application V18-17.
All right, thank you. So this is a little bit of a different item because it's really taking us back in time to 2019, in which on January 17th, 2019, the Board of Zoning Appeals approved a variance, and I'll show you a graphic to help create context. The former Mopac depot has been redeveloped by Beaverly Architects, and they are currently housed in there along with Mr. Adam and their architecture firms. As part of the redevelopment of the property, they submitted an application to the City Commission to have a portion of Pine Street vacated so they could create some off-street parking because the depot structure was developed with virtually no setback, and so no opportunity for off-street parking. Now, with that proposed parking plan, it required vehicles to pull in directly to the stall and back out directly into a street, which the off-street parking regulations require that all of those reverse maneuvers backing up has to be, you have to back up into an access aisle of a parking lot, and you can't back into a public street. So that's a prohibited movement within the parking regulations. And so they came before this board and asked for a variance to allow parking stalls to be accessed directly off of Pine Street. And when they did that, the board approved the requested variance subject to a couple of conditions. One is that the development of the north of the former depot building shall conform with the plan presented to the board, which includes paving parking spaces, landscaping, including a landscaping in the east parking planting area, and then a 4-foot by 8-foot monument sign and 5-foot 6-inch above finished grade. So what that means is there is a planter here, and this planter is going to have some low elevation plantings in it with their sign for the business, and then there's also a planter on the north side of the property that's also going to have a tree and plantings in it. And so what that requirement requires is that all of the paving or all the parking be paved up to the existing frontage. And so if we were to go to the old photograph before the redevelopment occurred, what you'll see is along Santa Fe, there was concrete that ran from the depot building out into the street and kind of sloped down, but it was kind of undefined as to, there was no curb and gutter, there was no grass, and it was broken up in poor shape. So where the property line was is basically where the building line was, and everything else was here, was paved in concrete. On the north side of the building, Pine Street was a gravel road at the time of redevelopment, and so the requirement was that all of the new parking spaces would be paved, recognizing that the area back behind wasn't. Well, now if you were to look at the aerial photo, what you would see is that it is now paved with what they call chip and seal asphalt. So it's not a traditional asphalt, it's a little bit of a different product, but the end result is a hard surfaced area that is impermeable, and so that's what we have today. And what the applicant is requesting is to expand their parking by having additional parking stalls here, curb and gutter this to match the curb and guttering that was done by OCCK when they constructed their parking lot. And then this is already, it doesn't show up in this photo, but well, in some photographs that I'll show you, is curb and guttering was, as part of a public works project within the last year or so, was created along this Santa Fe frontage. So all of this concrete that was in poor condition was torn out, curb and gutter was installed, fill dirt was brought in because it was just sloped down to the street to fill this in, and then turf grass has been brought in. And so what the applicant is wanting to do is basically make it so that the entire south side of Pine Street is paved with curb and gutter all the way across to Santa Fe. And so if we look at the photographs that we have, this is the curb and guttering that wraps all the way around. It's curb and gutter along Santa Fe with turf grass now. There's a kind of a closer image of that. This is the planter with the sign in it. As we work our way to the west or to the east, you see this other planter with the tree and plantings in it. And what they're proposing to do is bring in pavement here and add additional parking stalls, and then tie into this curbing here like so. And what that looks like on the plan is this. So this would be the curbing that they would add to connect to the curbing that we have for OCCK. This would be the curbing that would be added in front of the landscape area that we already have. And then this would be the new parking stalls that would be added. And currently this is gravel. So if you were to go out there today, you would have the chip seal on Pine Street, you'd have the paved parking stalls in the parking area, and then in between, you've got the gravel still. And so this would complete the entire south side of Pine Street and having curb and gutter and paving along that entire south street frontage. Now, the reason we're bringing this to you today is because the condition of approval that the BZA had in 2019 for this particular property is that the property be developed according to the site plan, and this is a different site plan. And so because it's a change in site plan and doesn't fully adhere to that requirement, staff wants to bring it to your attention to see if you believe that this is in keeping with the variance that was approved in 2019 and that this site plan could replace the previous one that was approved in 2019. So with that, we do have a few alternatives for you as well as recommendations. So you could approve the amended site plan. And you could do that to increase the number of private parking stalls that back directly into Pine Street from 6 to 9 spaces, because currently there's 6 and we would add 3 more. The board could approve the amended site plan. That's option 1. Option 2 is to approve the amended site plan associated with the variance to the access requirements of the off-street parking regulations to allow additional private parking spaces to back directly into Pine Street, subject to any conditions that you may deem appropriate. And number 3 is you could postpone consideration or action if you think additional information is needed. And 4, you could deny the applicant's request if the required findings of fact can't be made. Staff would recommend number 2, which is the approval with conditions option. And we have 5 conditions lined out there. The first is that all work shall conform with the amended plan presented to the board, which includes paved parking spaces, new curb and gutter, and landscaping. And so what that means is you would have the entire south side of Pine Street having pavement and curb and gutter as it connects into Pine Street. Number 2 is all parking stalls and surface connecting to the parking stalls to Pine Street shall be paved with concrete meeting the city specifications for driveway approaches. So all work that's done in the right-of-way has a city standard that it has to meet, and so that's what that is suggesting or requiring. Number 3 is all work within public right-of-way shall require a right-of-way concrete permit. Plans and specifications for the right-of-way concrete work must be reviewed and approved by the city engineer prior to commencing work. So anytime work is done in the right-of-way, we do require that a right-of-way permit be applied for and approved through the engineering department. Number 4 is all work within the public right-of-way must be performed by a licensed concrete contractor. And number 5 is all work within the public right-of-way must be inspected and for conformance with the City of Salina standards and specifications. So a lot of those are just standard requirements that you would have for any project in the right-of-way, but we did want to have those included as potential requirements and conditions of approval. so that it's really clear what needs to happen if you were to approve the variance request. So with that, we will take any questions.
Are there any questions for staff? Seeing no questions, would the applicant like to speak? Are there any questions for the applicant? Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak?
We do not have anyone on Zoom, so anybody interested in speaking would be in the room.
Is there a motion to come before the board?
I'll move that we approve the amended site plan associated with variance application 18-17, and with access requirements of the off-street parking regulations to allow additional private parking spaces to back directly into Pine Street, subject to any conditions that the board deems appropriate, which would include the 5 recommendations, staff recommendations that are attached.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Is there any unfinished business to come before the board?
We don't have any further business to bring before the board this evening. I'm not aware of any current filed applications that would result in an April meeting. So, I'm not aware of any filed applications that would result in an April meeting, but we will send out an alert to the board members to let you know whether that April meeting has been canceled or not.
Thank
And
you.
that would occur on the 3rd Thursday of April, which I don't have in front of me, but it could be the 20th. Yeah, so the next scheduled meeting is April 20th. At this time, we don't think we'll meet on that date, but we'll let you know through written correspondence to let you know if and when that meeting is canceled.
Thank you.
In the way of housekeeping, I have some minutes that need to be signed, and it just so happens that we have Chair Dorsweiler, Vice Chair Hardy, and Acting Chair Waters each need to sign a set, so.
Next, we'll move on to public forum.
We do not have anyone on Zoom, and it doesn't appear we have anybody in the room for public forum.
Is there a motion for adjournment?
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Go out and enjoy